Tell me why, when I sit down to write a 95,000 word thriller novel, I don't really have too much hesitation. I just go for it and it doesn't really faze me. But as soon as I have to write a query letter that's like 300 words just to try and promote this book and get someone to like it, I just can't do it. Like, I just stare at this page and I feel like I don't know how to write. I don't know how words work, and it's just so difficult. I've gone down a few rabbit holes on the internet. I'm so grateful that I'm trying to query in the age of the internet because there's so many more resources. But I just feel like there's so much information that I'm struggling to kind of like parse through it, and also just start working on my query letter instead of just like reading all this stuff. Not even to improve my query letter, but about. Like, there's so much talk out there about writing processes without like the actual nuts and bolts of how to make that writing process better, if that makes sense. Just like when I write a book, I know I just have to write a first draft. I know it's going to be bad and I can fix it in revision. But for some reason, because maybe it's such a small piece of writing, it just feels so impossible. Okay. I'm not gonna lie, that was really hard. I feel like I was battling for every single sentence. Like, I think there's so much overthinking going on of like, does this sentence say enough things? Is it filler? Am I explaining enough of the story? Am I explaining too much of the story? I think I'm maybe a little bit on the lower end because I've got like 2 paragraphs that cover the main plot and the characters, and that comes out to 133 words. I think it's supposed to be more like 200, but I don't think that too little is not good enough. Like, I think going too much would be the problem. But I'm just worried I'm not describing enough of the story. Like, I'm really focused in on the character and her issues and what she's facing and her stakes, and not as much the like concrete details of the stuff happening around her. But this is, I think, a strong first draft. It did make me realize, though, I still haven't come up with a good title for this story. In my head, it's still just like the mountaineering thriller revenge novel. So that's something I'm going to have to do before this is all over. I think the plan is now to revisit a lot of the querying materials I've been looking at and see if that, now that I have this, and I have it in the back of my head, maybe learning all this other information, I'll actually be able to like apply it directly rather than just trying to like get a bunch of information from like the void and do something with it. Now I'm like, if I hear a piece of advice that's like, make sure this is in it, then I'm like, oh, is it? And then I can edit, and I think that'll help me with a bit more direction and strengthening it. It might help me also figure out potentially how to elongate this a little bit. But so far so good, even though that took so long. And yeah. I'm about to sit down and do some more revisions. I've already made a few little tweaks, but I figured I should read it out to you so you can kind of get on the same wavelength as me while I'm starting to do these revisions, so you can kind of see my thought process and hopefully how much better it gets with each progressive edit. So we're just going to jump straight in. There are some edits here already, but I can see them with the track changes. So I have dear agent name, so I'll insert the agent's name, and then right below that, my intention is to put a personalization. So based on what the agent has said that they want, from a manuscript, either like on their website or on their manuscript wish list, which is a website where they show like, they're interested in this type of book or this type of genre or this type of trope or this type of theme. So trying to link it and be like, yeah, I actually did look you up, and this is the reason why I think you'd be interested in it. So that's just gonna be like a quick 1 sentence. And then Beth Huxley lost everything to mountaineering. Her world shattered when she suffered a devastating crevasse fall, leaving her a below-the-knee amputee, and ended completely a year later when her husband died in a similar accident. Unable to handle her grief, Beth turns her fury upon the reckless teammates she holds culpable for ruining her life. Set against the perilous backdrop of an international mountaineering competition, our revenge-fueled heroine gathers a team of 5 climbers that deserve her justice. However, everything comes at a cost. She is forced to reckon with the limitations of a prosthetic leg and, even worse, wrestle with a renewed appreciation for a life she had given up on. As her team slogs for the summit and old relationships strengthen, she must decide if getting revenge for her husband's murder is worth her future. But it may already be too late to change course. I don't have a title yet, which is, yeah, it's ridiculous. But title, I'll insert that there, explores the consequences of allowing one's life to be shaped by regret and rage and regret, coming in at 95,000 words. This adult thriller blends the extreme stress of high-altitude climbing from Into Thin Air by Jon Krakauer with the themes of revenge and redemption from Razorblade Tears by S.A. Cosby. And I'm going to have a little section, a bio. I haven't really figured it out yet, but probably just like a one sentence of like, I live here and I do this as my job. Like nothing more than that because I don't have any writing credentials. And then, thank you for your consideration. I'd be happy to send the full manuscript upon request. I spent so much time yesterday looking at all these different resources online. I went for a long walk and I listened to this podcast, The Shit No One Tells You About Writing, because in almost like each one of these podcasts, they actually take someone else's query letter and rip it apart a little bit. Like, not rip it apart in a negative way, but deconstruct it and try and give feedback. As well as the first 10 pages, because a lot of times, right, you'll send your 10 pages with your query letter to a literary agent. And I've been finding that really helpful, like listening to the critiques of other query letters, because it in a way like helps me think of it as like, are all these critiques also applicable to my query letter? I've also been looking up all these different like articles online and other query letters that are online, and I feel conflicted because I feel like my query letter doesn't really have a lot of like details, but it's also not vague. Like, I think you really get a sense of the conflict and the stakes and the main character, which is like the key things for a query letter, but I feel like there's not a lot of like discrete detail. So yesterday I actually posted my query letter, the one before these edits that I just made, to Reddit. There's this thread called PubTips where people will often submit their query letters to get critiqued by people on Reddit. I just wanted a sanity check. I wanted to see if people were picking up on anything that I could work on, you know, just to be like, am I completely off base? I don't know. I've gotten a couple comments from there, so I figured we could go through those and then talk about how I need to change this. The first comment said, this is a fresh premise and I think the query mostly works, which is good, but they had a couple notes. So they had an issue with the died in a similar accident. So that's when I was talking about the husband died in a similar accident. Maybe add a year later or whatever the timeline is. Great. So I'd actually come to that conclusion too, because as I was reading it, I was like, when I was doing my revisions yesterday, I was like, it's really confusing about when, you know, the different things happen. And all this happens before the start of the book too, which is why I'm like, I don't want to spend that much time on it, but also it's like really important to how it crafted like her motivation. I'm curious why she holds the friends responsible for his death, but maybe that reason doesn't need to be in the query. I think I need to change this section out. It's something I've been thinking about because I don't really have any other characters mentioned, but the other characters have a pretty big importance. So at least choosing one or two to mention, and I don't even need to use like their first name, but maybe just like their role in the story a little bit. So I can tie one of the characters into this. Okay, and then they also said, our revenge-fueled heroine. This phrase bothers me, and I think it's the jarring first-person hour. I would just say Beth. Yeah, that makes sense. I was also thinking about that too, but I think I kept it in because I wanted to use revenge-fueled term, and you can't really do like revenge-fueled Beth. Like, it doesn't sound the same. But yeah, that is a little weird. Okay, I'm gonna have to take that out. And then Into Thin Air is very old. Unless it's a super strong comp, I'd switch to something published in the last 5 years. That's fair. Into Thin Air really is old. It's something I was thinking about, but I was like, I have two comps. So for comp titles, right, books you're comparing your story to, they should be traditionally published because you're trying to traditionally publish. They should be published in the last 5 years and then also like linked to your book in some way. And so you can also use like media or like TV or movies or something, but if you have two comps, one should always be a book, right? So I think in my head I was like, I can use Into Thin Air even if it's an old book because the other one's a new book. I should spend some time trying to come up with a better comp list. I kind of just threw it together, and I think I could probably find another good one. I just found that Into Thin Air was just so good, and it is really similar in that like intensity of what's going on in the mountain. And so I read Into Thin Air back in the fall, as well as, oh shoot, it was like a Denali book. And that one was fiction, but I think it's self-published, which is why I'm not able to use it. But I'm sure I can find another book. And honestly, reading books like that are so fun. So I should spend a bit more time on comp titles, I think. And then the only other comment I got on this was reiterating that died in a similar accident. This was tricky for me too, but rather because her accident was so severe, it seems like he might have quit the mountaineering life himself afterwards. Could it have been the same accident instead? So I think this is just going to show that that wording was terrible, and I need to kind of like restructure it a little bit. But in case you're curious, it did happen in 2 different periods of time. And the reason it wouldn't have just like dissuaded him from mountaineering is because like you take a certain amount of risk when you're mountaineering. Like you accept the fact that these things can happen. And that's a lot of like the themes of the story, of like you're persevering despite doing this actually really incredibly dangerous activity. So I definitely need to rework this section, talking about the husband's death and really clarifying why that's set up, and maybe bring in why then she then blames other people, and then as well changing our eventual heroine and the comps. So that's what I'm getting from this. So the reason I made these changes a year later was I was trying to distinguish these 2 events, and I don't know how in the weeds I need to get, but I think it is important that I do make some sort of, I add more here, because if both people had an issue with this, it means something's wrong here. So I'm gonna have to figure that out. I took out "and old friends" because I want to add "an old relationship strengthen" down in this section, because basically she says like she's wrestling with a renewed appreciation of her life she had given up on. And so I wanted to also be clear that that renewed appreciation, a lot of it was to do with these strengthening relationships. Like a lot of people she's bringing to this mountain, she was friends with, they were important to her, and she's kind of like distanced herself, but now it's like she's starting to remember all of these things that like, you know, make life worth living. So I have that there, and then I changed "but" to "however" because I added a "but" here because I didn't want that repetition, but it may already be too late to change course. And then I added that because I want it to be clear that she's actually enacting part of her plan. Like she's not spending the whole book kind of going back and forth of should I, shouldn't I, you know, very Hamlet, to do or not to do or whatever it is. But like here, she's not just in this state of I don't know, like she is actually doing stuff. Based on our Reddit comments, this does not work, so we can just make that Beth. I do want to add revenge or revenge fueled somewhere, so I'm just gonna put down here, so I can think of a new place to put that. And then for the comps, for now I'm going to keep it like that, just because I think whenever I find another book, I'm hoping it's still like a high altitude climbing fiction book. So I'm going to keep that because hopefully I can just slot in that title there. So now the big issue that I'm coming up on is this bad boy over here. When her husband died in a similar accident. I may have to take a small break, figure this out, and come back, because it's a lot of pressure to do this while you're watching. So this is what I have come up with. So her world ended completely a year later when her husband didn't return from a mountaineering trip she had backed out of last minute. So I think that works well, because in this case, like, you're learning her husband didn't return. I mean, maybe there's gonna be some confusion of like, is he dead? Did he leave her? But I think it's kind of self-implied. Maybe I'll have to rethink that a little bit. But she backed out of last minute, I think, shows that she had been working towards getting better and then stepped back, and kind of explaining a little bit of that grief. I'm thinking because there was still that question from the Redditor asking, like, why does she hold them culpable? So I might add one more sentence here. I was thinking about trying to add it in earlier, but that sentence is already really long. Like, this sentence is so long, it doesn't need to get any longer. Like, I feel like you're trying to put a lot of information in this, but also you want the reader to actually be able to like follow, especially if they're trying to read it quickly, like I know literary agents do. So we could do something voicey of like, after all, lines of like, after all, like it wasn't her or her husband's gear that had failed. Oh yeah. I don't know if I like that sentence. I may change it up a little bit, but I think this is where I'm at for now. I haven't really talked about any of the other people on this trip. Maybe that's okay. I don't know. I'm gonna sit on this just a little bit longer. I'll see if I get any more Reddit comments to help me out with this, and though my actionable will be trying to figure out different comps. I may have to read some mountaineering books, which isn't a bad thing. I love a good mountaineering book. You know that whole query letter we just worked on? So I've actually rewritten basically the whole thing. So hear me out. We got one more comment on our Reddit thread that really just changed everything. So let me pull that up for you and we'll confer. This person said, cool premise with unique protagonist, a few quick notes. Her world shattered when she suffered a devastating crevasse fall, leaving her below the knee amputee, and ended completely when her husband died in a similar accident. I had trouble following this sentence. Her world shatters when she becomes injured, and then her world ends when her husband dies. There's a lot going on here. I try to smooth this out and separate the two different events. As her team slogs to the summit, she must decide if getting revenge for her husband's murder is worth her future. I thought he died in an accident. Why did it become a homicide? I'm side-eyeing your protagonist here. I think she also wants revenge because of her accident. True, she does. I'm not completely clear on why her husband would go climbing with the same group of people that caused Beth's accident. I'd also love to know what the reckless behavior was. Hope this is helpful. My takeaway from this, it's very similar to what the other people said. So again, that one sentence or just this description of explaining her accident and his accident, people are getting a little hung up on, and for fair reason. It's not a very good sentence. And so this is also maybe causing issues later. So I've kind of come to the conclusion that that first paragraph in my query letter just wasn't working. I needed to do something because I feel like I was trying to do these like band-aid solutions to make it work, but it's just like adding more detail. And I feel like it's almost like when you're in court, it's like the less detail, the better. Like the less things you give them to question, the better off you'll be because there'll be less things to get confused about. So I rewrote the query letter to try and be a little bit more clear while also using less detail. Here is my new query letter. Beth Huxley is not experiencing a psychotic break. Anyone would feel a murderous rage towards the reckless person who made them a below-the-knee amputee or killed their husband, whether or not it could be classified as a mountaineering accident. Unable to contain her grief, Beth gathers a team of 5 deserving athletes, each with a climbing story they would rather not tell, on a trip they shouldn't expect to return from. While she has prepared the poisons and weapons to kill each of her victims, her main target is the last man to see her husband alive, and who also happens to be Beth's childhood love. But the mountains are no longer the safe haven she trusted in her youth, not when she must reckon with the limitations of a prosthetic leg. And plotting in private did not account for her growing appreciation for a life she had given up on. As her team slogs for the summit and old relationships strengthen, she must decide if getting revenge for her husband's murder is worth her future, but it may already be too late to change course. So you can see it's like still kind of similar, especially the last bit. But I decided to just try and make it less about how the injuries happened and more about what she perceives those injuries to be. The only thing I'm a little bit nervous about is in my second sentence, anyone would feel a murderous rage toward the reckless person who made them a below-the-knee amputee or killed their husband. I'm worried people are going to take that as one person did both of those things, but it's like two separate people. But then I was playing around with like, anyone would feel the murderous rage towards the reckless people who made them a below. I mean, maybe that would work better. I don't know. Please let me know. I feel like I'm just like overthinking everything. But now that I have, they could be classified as a mountaineering accident, showing that she doesn't really believe that, I think that makes it a little bit easier later when she's like her husband's murder, you know, like it's a little bit more intuitive why she leapt to that instead of considering it an accident, right? Because it's all about perception. So yeah, we have a whole new query letter. And I do feel like this is better because one of the things I was concerned about with the first one is I'm not really including a lot of the characters other than the main character. So at least now I'm able to bring in her ex. I'm talking about the 5 deserving athletes, so I'm putting a number to it and making that a bit more obvious. So I think this is a lot stronger. I mean, it's a little annoying I didn't come to this one first, but I feel like you have to write to then see the mistakes to rewrite. And rewriting this one was so much easier than writing the first query letter yesterday. I struggled so hard with that one, and then this one, it kind of just came out. So I'm going to sit on this one for a little bit. I can't post to Reddit more than once a week, so maybe in a week's time I'll post it, see what kind of confusion it brings, maybe send it to some people who haven't read my book at all or know much about my book just to get their opinion on what's confusing. But I'm feeling a lot more confident about this one. It's been a couple of days and I'm still feeling really good about that query letter. I've gone in and edited just like a couple of things, clarified some stuff, but it's basically the same draft. And I even sent it to a couple of my friends who've not read the book or I haven't even really told much of the plot, and they said that it was pretty good, as in, like, they didn't really have much in the way of like confusion. So I would say if you found that second query letter that I just read in any way confusing, if you have any comments, if you have any feedback, please let me know. But I think I might throw it up in like a week's time on Reddit just to see what comes of it. But I think this is it. I did the best to capture the story, and I think time will tell if it actually gets anyone interested. So thanks for making it to the end of this video, and I'll see you in the next one.